Occasion.
I call the honourable member Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is great to be able to stand in this House and speak in the budget debate of this government's third budget. This is a sensible, responsible and balanced budget, clearly a budget that suits the times we are in.
Hear, hear.
The hard-working New Zealanders, the hard-working members of my electorate want to know that they have a government that is being responsible with their hard-earned tax. And that's why they're pleased to have the leadership, the strong leadership in these challenging economic times from Prime Minister John Key and Finance Minister Bill English. So clearly this budget is about building a stronger economy. Because we know, New Zealanders know, that is the only way that they and their families will get better jobs, higher wages, and get the sorts of services from the public sector, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in police, that they deserve and expect from their hard-earned tax dollars. So what I wanted to do was just kind of give the context, give you, because the members of the opposition tend to forget the fact that there is a plan. I don't think they actually probably would recognise one because they haven't seen one before. In 9 years they didn't have one. But anyway, I want to go back and look at the 09 and 10 budgets to provide a bit of context for where we are. I also want to just actually give, rather than talk about my perspective, Mr. Speaker, I thought it would be helpful to bring you the voices of my constituents, because over the last 2 weeks in the recess I have been out in every corner of my electorate, literally, and I've spoken in cafes, I've spoken to social services groups, I have been visiting early childhood centres and schools, because they are important beneficiaries of this budget, to grey power, to age concern, you name it. I've met with them over the last 2 weeks because it's important that they understand this government's plan for a stronger economy. So these were the words that they used. This is a fair budget. This is a budget that pretty much brought them what they expected. It's responsive and responsible. It's logical. It's understandable. And some of them feared there might be something drastic, but they were reassured when they realised that there wasn't. The overwhelming concern from the constituents in Taupō was the level of government borrowing. $300 million a week. You could see it as you spoke to them and looked in their faces to see the level of horror at what sort of figure actually meant for us as a country, and the desperate need for us to get our debt under control and get back to black as soon as possible. To be fair, some of them also were concerned about some of the programs that they'd got used to, things like working for families, things like student loans. And when we explained the detail of how these changes would actually mean we'd get to keep those programs, but they would be affordable and sustainable over time, their concerns disappeared before my eyes. So let's have a look at this plan. So we started, Mr. Speaker, with our first budget in 09, which was clearly around helping New Zealanders through the worst times of the recession and starting to turn around the forecasts of ever-rising debt. 2010, the next year of the plan, was building the platform for savings and investment and had the biggest tax reform in 25 years, which ended up with 73% of our earners, Mr. Speaker, paying no more than 17.5% tax. Now, I get sick to death of hearing opposition members talk about the fact that this side of the House gives tax cuts to the rich. So I want to just remind the House, Mr. Speaker, that 2/3, now focus on your maths, guys, 2/3 of the cost of the income tax from last year have gone into reducing the bottom two. Those are the ones down there. So 2/3 of the cost went to the bottom two income tax rates. So then, third year of the plan, budget 2011, no response. So this is around a faster plan to surplus, making sure that we get there a year ahead of what we had projected last budget. Great to have a plan when you're delivering ahead of schedule. A plan to rebuild Christchurch and also to ensure that we have higher national savings. So this is on the context, of course, that we had a forecast when we came into office of debt hitting 60% of GDP. We are now managing within our plan to keep it under 30%. Now that is a stunning result. Half what the previous government would have done. So let's talk about some of the areas that are important to my electorate. And I want to specifically talk about families, because that's another thing that frustrates me, is hearing members of the other side talk about the fact that this budget is tough on families. So I want to correct some of the myths from that side of the House. Now, working for families. Let me start with working for families. Admittedly, it's a program that was introduced on that side, and credit where credit's due. For families in need, it's been working. But one of the challenges with this program is that it was on a spending level projected that was never, ever going to be sustainable. So what do? What we've done is look at the families that perhaps most people would expect actually would never have got it in the first place. So for a family earning $100,000, $120,000, $140,000, actually most people didn't have an expectation that they would get working for families on that level. So what we have done with this budget, 280,000, that's a big number. Do you guys know your maths? 280,000 families will be better off with our changes to working for families. Now, they're not interested in hearing that, so I'm going to say it again. 280,000 families will be better off. Because this side of the House realises that when you have a program that in the 05-06 year has actually doubled in the spending, that's clearly not sustainable. And early childhood education is another classic example. One of the questions that I've been asking, Mr Speaker, when I've been out in my electorate is, and it's a fairly simple maths question, so I'm hoping that the other side can figure this one out. If over a period of 5 years you spend 3 times as much money, what would you expect in terms of an outcome? And most people logically sort of say, oh, well, maybe we'd get 3 times as much for our money. Well, unfortunately, under the early childhood education of the previous government, 5 years, 3 times as much money, not even 1% more participating. So, Mr Speaker, I'm absolutely shameless in saying that for me, Māori and Pacific students who have no early childhood education deserve a better go. They deserve to be in early childhood education, because if they don't, they will never catch up. And this side of the House actually isn't willing to tolerate that. So our clear and simple focus is on participation. We are spending $1.4 billion, the most ever. And the $550 million that's additional, some of that, 416, is specifically because of roll growth. So that annihilates the comments from the previous speaker who says that that doesn't take it into consideration. The other thing, Mr Speaker, on a local note, we've had $4.8 million into the Lake Taupō boat harbour facilities, which will have a significant impact in my electorate. Unfortunately, the previous government let the assets run down, and this is a government who said this is an icon for New Zealand. We need to make sure that New Zealanders and visitors from overseas enjoy our lake. So $4.8 million specifically into that. And the final positive piece of news for the day, Mighty River Power in my electorate today has announced $466 million into a new plant at Ngā Tamariki for geothermal developments, which is good news for my electorate. It's good news for this country, and I say bring it on.
I